something that was missing that made you take this step into entrepreneurship, coaching, blah, etc.?
I think I think that peace was missing, even though I was very ambitious and I had succeeded and I did love the work that I did. But it's mostly looking back that I realized that peace was missing. I had to be hit by a two by four. I don't know if that's different, but when I was in college, I had a connection to the Native Americans because I was organizing an Earth Day festivity for the university. And before that, we had had Ralph Nader and David Brower, big names in the environmental field. This was in the early 70s. And I said, what am I going to do that will be different? We can have another talking head. They were absolutely wonderful. And I found out about a group in upstate New York where I went to college called the White Roots of Peace. And they were an Iroquois Nation group who worked towards peace. And I called them up and I said, "Would you would you like to would you like to come up and do a couple days with Earth Day?" And they said, "Yeah, that'd be really great." And it was fabulous. And they did ceremony and they talked to people and set up teepees, and that was great. When when I got out of graduate school and thought about going into the environmental field, my heart really was with the indigenous nations and their view of nature. But I had gone through enough in the real world that I realized that wasn't where the power was. It wasn't that I had to have power, it was the ability to make a difference. So I left. After graduate school, I went and worked at the Environmental Protection Agency because in some things that I had worked on, they were the ones that had the power. So jump up to when I'm in California in the environmental field, working in my own business. And a friend said to me, I'm going to hear this woman speak, and she works with Native Americans. Would you like to go? Well, thinking back to that time, I said, yeah, it'd be good. But in those days, they called it New Age work. And I went to a whole life expo, which is very well known in the States. And I said, okay, I'll go and I'll hear this woman. But it was a bit of an alien world to me. There were psychics and different things. And I wasn't cynical, but I was a little skeptical of what it was about. And then when it came time to hear her speak, the line was around the block. And I said, what's going on here? And I went in and she did meditations. My mind was very active. I was not one to meditate. And she had crystals and all that, but her voice drew me. There was something about her voice.
And welcome back to the Passionate Pioneer podcast, series 3. You know me, I'm Beth Taylor. I am the Passionate Pioneer, and this podcast is your connection into spiritual awakening experiences and the path to joyful living. And today I'm joined by Anne Venino. Hi, Anne.
Hi, Beth. Good to be with you.
So for people who don't know you, would you mind giving us a quick introduction before we dive into your story?
Sure. I was born and raised in New York City, went through schools in New York, and then embarked on an environmental career. And I was involved in the very first Earth Day in New York City, and then went on to the Environmental Protection Agency and spent about 21 years in that field. And then I took a 180-degree turn and became a coach. And I do new direction coaching, coaching for a new era, and the foundation of my coaching is career coaching and transition. And about 3 years ago, a client I had worked with coaching her managers in her nonprofit said to me, I know about your environmental background and I really need someone to represent me on an environmental coalition. And I said, I have not done environment for quite a while. And she goes, I don't care. I need somebody that I can trust. And I think your background will work. So I got involved with a coalition of nonprofits in Los Angeles that create green schoolyards. They plant trees, they provide for 100% stormwater capture, and in urban environments, they green these schoolyards and give children that don't usually have it access to nature. And so all of a sudden I was faced with what goes on my LinkedIn? Who am I right now? Which is a question that you asked. Who am I? So I worked with a woman that had helped me on LinkedIn before, and we came up with catalyzing positive change for people and the planet because I get involved in climate change. And recently, a year ago, I moved from California, where I had been for quite a while, to Tucson, Arizona, and started a new chapter of my life here in the desert. And I'm very happy being here.
Well, that's nice. You mentioned a few things there. You mentioned the catalyst for change and also nature. And I know that you've written a book as well,
Yes, I
right?
have.
So
Chrysalis.
so I know we'll talk about that as well. But yeah, the catalyst of change, and you talk about from the caterpillar to the butterfly. And if people don't know that story, we know that caterpillars start and they get very, very fat and then they cocoon and then they soak up everything they need to know, then they cocoon and then they transform into the butterfly, which is your transformation.
That's right.
That's what you talk about. And it's funny because my symbol that I talk about is the lily, the water lily, that starts in the depths of the mud
In the mud, right.
and it rises to the light. And when it touches the light, it blossoms. Very
Yeah.
similar to the caterpillar and the butterfly story. But
And
I'd also love that you incorporate nature because I think that we so underestimate nature in the last, what, century, few centuries.
agree.
It's
Yes.
disappeared. It's like, where's the importance of nature in everyday living? It's so important, right?
Right. And it's pushed aside by development, and we've lost the wealth of life that the indigenous cultures, some still preserve it, but that they had, and there's a real loss in that. And in Los Angeles, where mainly I work on the green schoolyards, there are children that don't even have parks within a mile of them. And these green schoolyards are wonderful. They have outdoor classrooms. They have 100% permeable surfaces. They have butterfly gardens. Up in Oakland, I'm not involved in it, but I heard a presentation. There's a school where the kids grow all the vegetables for their school cafeteria. And the curriculum is built around that. And I think that is life-changing in a city. Right.
It really is. It totally is. I mean, we've coined the phrase concrete jungle, but people really don't realize how how it's soul destroying to be in concrete all the time and not see any nature.
That's a good word. And you're in the mountains in Italy, correct?
I am, and people, you know
Yeah.
how many people say, "Oh, you're so lucky you live in the mountains." Lucky. I chose this. I
Right,
created this life for
right.
me because I wanted nature on my door. And I've lived in cities. I've also lived in islands in the Caribbean where I was surrounded by water and sand and beaches. Not too much nature as such, but it's bare nature, the sand and the sea. But I wanted to live in greenery. I wanted the nature on my doorstep. So,
Great. Well, growing up, my first 7 years, I was in Manhattan in a apartment complex, and it was a concrete jungle. But my mom, and my dad were very much into nature, and he used to say, "We love the city and we love being here, but you have to get out into nature, or you're not living." And so we'd take weekend trips and go out, and that really was the foundation of a love of nature. He really felt you can't live in that concrete environment 100% of the time.
and I love that. I love that you've had that background because I had something similar when I was growing up in concrete jungle, concrete city. And my father he used to grow vegetables. Grandparents grew vegetables in the garden, so did we. We had a garden, very important.
Yes.
Most cities these days have apartments and there's no garden. in England, we're very lucky because most places are houses with gardens, similar to the States.
Right.
And so, you've got a little bit of nature there. But we did the same, Anne. We used to go into the mountains, or the hills, not really mountains, but hills into the countryside. Because we had a dog and we used to go and camp. We used to go camping. We used to walk the
Oh, great.
dog.
So did we. Yeah,
All of
camping.
those things when I was growing up. And and it's so important. And I think children these days are lacking that.
They are.
And
They
it's really
absolutely
sad.
are.
It's really sad to hear that there's no parks in the city or no parks in the area where they live.
Right, because we focus on lower socioeconomic areas where the need is real. And one of the things that was an impetus for that was not necessarily, beautification or environmental protection. It was because the projections for Los Angeles on heat with climate change are very high. And there weren't even in some campuses enough shade trees for kids to be under a tree. So it's seen as very necessary because in the next even 5 years, and even now, because LA's temperatures are rising, the kids are not going to be able to play outside. They're even in Los Angeles talking about times when people who work outside can be working and when they're going to have to come in. The work situation is going to change. It may be that midday they're on 3 hour breaks and working longer days because of the heat.
Well, there's an article I read a few years ago, and it was about one of the cities that first decided to cut down all the trees and just have, and then they realized that there was no shade. It was hotter. They actually had disease. They started to get disease because there were no trees. There was nothing. Trees give us oxygen.
Right, exactly.
Trees and plants, they take away all those nasty toxins for us. Thank you very much. And they give
Right,
back fresh air and oxygen, right? I think
absolutely.
what that's very easy to understand, and it's quite devastating that we've destroyed so much of that nature.
Right. And they give us a knowledge of the planet that we live on. That's what we
Right.
really lose, that things grow, the change in seasons, the importance of the oxygen and clearing carbon dioxide in excess. That's the connection that we've really lost. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. So I think
But
that what you're doing with the NGOs and the children's schools is so important. It's so important that we
thank
start
you.
with the younger generation and we
Right.
teach them how important it is let's get back to nature.
There's one school that my client did. She is a bit of a pioneer in this work, and she did one of the first high-profile green schoolyards. But there was another small elementary school that she did, and they made a butterfly garden, and it was in a very poor socioeconomic area. And now that was about 4 or 5 years ago, and now the butterflies actually migrate through the butterfly garden and the kids have science classes out there.
That's amazing, right?
Yeah, it is. It's great.
That's amazing. So let's go back to the beginning. That was a beautiful, lovely introduction there to
Well, thank you.
nature and schools and
Thank
just
you.
right up my street, talking my
Good.
language. So let's go back to the start of your story then, which is going to be interesting. So can you describe the moment that you before you went into coaching, um, describe the moment when you first realized that your life looked good on the outside. It was all right, everything was ticking along, but something was missing on the inside. What was that? What was that something that was missing that made you take this step into entrepreneurship, coaching, blah, etc.?
I think I think that peace was missing, even though I was very ambitious and I had succeeded and I did love the work that I did. But it's mostly looking back that I realized that peace was missing. I had to be hit by a 2x4. I don't know if that's different, but when I was in college, I had a connection to the Native Americans because I was organizing an Earth Day festivity for the university. And before that, we had had Ralph Nader and David Brower, big names in the environmental field. This was in the early 70s. And I said, what am I going to do that will be different? We can have another talking head. They were absolutely wonderful. And I found out about a group in upstate New York where I went to college called the White Roots of Peace. And they were an Iroquois Nation group who worked towards peace. And I called them up and I said, "Would you would you like to would you like to come up and do a couple days with Earth Day?" And they said, "Yeah, that'd be really great." And it was fabulous. And they did ceremony and they talked to people and set up teepees, and that was great. When when I got out of graduate school and thought about going into the environmental field, my heart really was with the indigenous nations and their view of nature. But I had gone through enough in the real world that I realized that wasn't where the power was. It wasn't that I had to have power, it was the ability to make a difference. So I left. After graduate school, I went and worked at the Environmental Protection Agency because in some things that I had worked on, they were the ones that had the power. So jump up to when I'm in California in the environmental field, working in my own business. And a friend said to me, I'm going to hear this woman speak, and she works with Native Americans. Would you like to go? Well, thinking back to that time, I said, yeah, it'd be good. But in those days, they called it New Age work. And I went to a whole life expo, which is very well known in the States. And I said, okay, I'll go and I'll hear this woman. But it was a bit of an alien world to me. There were psychics and different things. And I wasn't cynical, but I was a little skeptical of what it was about. And then when it came time to hear her speak, the line was around the block. And I said, what's going on here? And I went in and she did meditations. My mind was very active. I was not one to meditate. And she had crystals and all that, but her voice drew me. There was something about her voice. And that night I had a dream. And her name is Lynn Andrews. And she worked one-on-one with people. And she had written some very popular books called Medicine Woman series. So I had this dream, and that was a bit of the 2x4. And then I read her books. And then I wrote her and told her that I had read her books and about the dream. And she wrote me back and said, I do one-on-ones. And she was in Los Angeles, where I was living at the time. And I went, and it took me a couple months to kind of make that leap. And I went and I met with her, and I ended up working with her for 21 years. And honestly, she said to me, she would say every once in a while in the first year, why don't you take a pillow when you're home and just speak to your inner child? And I'd say, I had a great I had a great childhood. I know that a lot of people have dealt with abuse and they've had problems, but I'm really here just for the adventure. It took her 2 years to get me to look inside. And when I started looking inside, I saw that lack of peace. I saw that I gave my power away, and I saw that I had a major need for approval. And she said to me, if I was in a business partnership at the time, that was a real mirror for me. And she said, if someone can get inside your head and confuse you, you're not holding your power. And that was the real start of the journey. But throughout my journey, I've been dedicated to it. I've been resilient, but I find when there are big changes, I kind of have to get hit by a 2x4.
That's
That's
a
a
great. I love the way you describe that, getting hit by a 2x4. I think they're what would call spiritual moments, spiritual turning points. And
right,
sometimes they do feel like getting hit by a 2x4 because, you know, people talk about the spiritual journey. Oh, la 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 la. It's all roses and grass and flowers and butterflies. No, it's actually really hellish sometimes, you know.
right.
it can be really, you can have really dark moments and moments where you just get hit in the head with a 2x4, right?
Right.
Like big
Right.
moments, almost like light bulb moments. And
That's right. And
it could be scary.
that's right. And she had to coax me. I mean, 2 years to get me to look at my inner child. That's a long time. And I saw her every couple of months. But I persisted. I knew intuitively that there was something there.
It's crazy because the first coach I met, and I'll say her name is Andrea Callanan, and she's a world-renowned coach. And she came into my life, and the same thing, and I didn't realize that I needed to learn the and uncondition myself.
Hmm.
I didn't know that was I didn't know that was possible. I didn't know that was I went to her for business advice, and we ended up doing the inner work because that's what I needed was the inner work, the inner child, the little Beth, the one that had always been put in the corner, the one that was bullied at school, the one that, didn't have a voice, the one that thought she wasn't good enough.
Yep,
It's
that's it.
all those layers, all those coats that you have to take one coat off, then you deal with the next one, then you take that coat off, and you do, and that's how it is, isn't it? So
That's
I
right.
I can resonate with that, Anne.
Yes, and one thing that Lynn used to say is that you go into the deepest part of your wounds and find the seeds of wisdom that are planted there. I think you really need to go in. And then, you speak about authenticity a lot and joy. I think that's the way that you find it. I'm not saying, and with my clients, I don't push this necessarily unless they're there. I'm not saying that people have to go through the kind of challenging journey that perhaps you and I went through. That makes us better able to work with people. But you really have to know yourself. And I think I went through it in somewhat slow motion. But I think the reason for that was that I was going to be a coach and I needed to understand what people were going through and have that empathy.
Yeah. I totally agree. I think you've got to, as a coach or mentor, therapist, healer, anything where you're supporting other people, you've got to have done the inner work. You've
I
got to
agree.
you've got to have gone through that journey first. And sometimes it's only when you've been through that journey, sometimes a few times, there's a few things,
I agree. Yes.
right? That you can finally get to that stage, that point where you can go, oh, now I understand.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
So I can totally resonate with that part of your story. And did it work? Did you actually manage to talk to little Anne and scream into the pillow and or have a little
I
conversation
did.
with her?
It took me 2 years, but I did. And some friends of mine were that had been very involved in that were saying to me, "You've got to go in a room and scream," but it wasn't really who I was. And anger, I don't think was at the core. It was this people pleasing and need for approval. And then my business partnership was a mirror for me, where I had to take my power and I was giving away my power. And so it definitely took. And I worked, and it was during the time that I was working with Lynn, and she started a mystery school that I went through and I was a mentor in. And that's when I found coaching, which was a big change. And I think it all was connected.
Well, reclaiming your power, right? Listening to your inner voice.
Right.
That's a big step. So you've mentioned one of the ladies that helped you. So were there any other specific practices or people that helped you connect with your inner wisdom, your intuition, on the journey?
Lynn was a major factor because I worked with her for so long. And as I said, for a long time, she was in Los Angeles. And then she did this school. After working with Lynn, when I went on, I kept my connection with her, but not as strongly as a teacher after the 21 years. And but a big part of working with Lynn, she did a workshop one time. It was 5 days out in the Joshua Tree Desert, and it was called Changing Your Relationship with Time. And when we got there, she taught in a more circular than linear fashion. She believed that you had to experience things, that we live on borrowed knowledge, and that doesn't really get it inside. So when she opened up the workshop, she said, the key to changing a relationship with time is to be fully in your body. And it was like, well, what does that mean? And then we pursued. And one of the big things that came out of that was living in the present moment, like Eckhart Tolle and the power of now. And I think that was a huge, huge influence on my life that she planted the seed. But as I went on in my business, in my life, I started stopping, looking at the present moment. I read different books. And that I think was a major, major influence. And then my late husband and I moved out to the high Mojave Desert from LA. And that was another, not necessarily a two by four, but we thought we were moving out to be closer to nature. We were moving out to be in a solitude that I had never experienced before and be close to nature. My husband read a book about a meadow. I don't know the full title of it, I don't remember, but it was about three generations that lived on a meadow. And in it, he read a, an idea that said he lived on the land so long that it almost let him in. And that's what my husband pursued. He was creative, he was quieter, he was a filmmaker, and he really got close to the land. And I feel the two by four was that I'm extroverted. I had to be pulled out of the world a bit. I kept coaching, but I was very in the mountains, very close to nature, and there wasn't much interaction with people, sometimes on business and definitely with my coaching clients, but that was virtual. And then in 2022, my husband passed away, and I was taking care of a house on 2 acres, dealing with 3-foot rattlesnakes, all kinds of things on my own. And that was a big turning point. It was resilience. I had some good friends, women who were very self-sufficient and independent, and I was in many ways, but I had to get there in terms of my house and living in a wildfire area. And then I cleared out the house, I sold it. There was a bit of drama around that because there was a wildfire while we were in escrow in my town. And then I moved to Tucson. When I was in California, after my husband died, there was one day I was in the dining room and I was looking out the window at a Joshua tree, which is characteristic of the Mojave Desert. And in my mind's eye, I saw a mountain. And I said to myself, oh my God, I've got another chapter in my journey and I have to climb this mountain. And because of the wildfires and all that happened, I came to Tucson, and now I've been here a year, and now my journey is building a life here. I'm still close to nature, but in more of an urban environment, and it's wonderful. So it goes on, doesn't it, Beth? It just keeps going.
There's a lot to unpack in that story, part of that story.
Right,
And I
right.
love it. I love it because, you talked about the fact that you're an extrovert. Your late husband was a bit more introverted.
Right.
But there is that balance. And I'm the same. I'm an extroverted person. So people can't understand why I am in an isolated place. It's very confusing for them. Well, you're such an extrovert. You love people. You do, but I think there's a couple of things. One is I've evolved on my spiritual journey. I'm very
Mhm.
comfortable with myself. I don't
Yeah,
need external validation. And the other thing is peace. You talked about peace, and
right.
peace is so important. It's the most important thing, peace and being near nature. And you have to have that balance. I'm not, I do say I'm a bit of a hermit, but I talk to people all day online. I'm
Right.
building my community online, and I'd like to have some in-person retreats as well further down the line. But at
That's
the
great.
moment, I'm building an online community. When I came here, I didn't know that was going to happen. but I knew that it had to happen for me. But it's very confusing at first, isn't it? Because as an extrovert,
Very, very.
you're trying to, you're trying to have that, there's that inner resistance and challenge. Because
Absolutely. And being
yeah,
quiet, it's not necessarily natural when you're out in that kind of environment.
yeah.
It was wonderful. And I wonder, Beth, I love Tucson, and I say that truly. It's amazing. I can go to a great restaurant. The food in Tucson is fantastic, or hear great music in 5 minutes or 15 minutes. I can be in a national park in 20 minutes. I have a house that has a nice backyard. It's relatively quiet, particularly quiet for a city. But I wonder, because I think ahead a lot, I'm not doing anything about it, but I say, will I have to go back? I don't see the constellations. I don't have complete quiet. And I say, and I can do that outside Tucson. But at the same time, my good friends who are here, they said, you're on your own now, and life is great in Tucson. So they said, stay in the city, and I'm happy here. But I really wonder, as my life goes on, is it going to be that I really need that connection to nature? I miss it. You I still get intuitive messages, and I can keep my spiritual practice up, but I don't have that. I realized that in California, with the house that we had, I could look out the window and there was always beauty. And no matter what happened, even after my husband died and I had to clear everything out, I could walk out that door and have peace.
Hi, I just wanted to pop on here just to say thank you so much for being here, watching this video and supporting my channel. It is my honor to bring you these stories from these incredible women who are passionate about their lives and have alchemized their spiritual awakening journeys from service to self to service to others. If you would like to be part of my Passionista community, just grab a free copy of my workbook, which you'll find a link below. It's called Your Passionista Journey Starts Here. And start making those small changes to your life that you need right now. Thank you again for being here. Love you to subscribe and hit the notification button so that you know when all the new weekly episodes are live. Thanks again, Passionista. Much love and joy. Now let's get back to the interview.
Everything wasn't resolved, but I could have that. And here, I don't really have that. Maybe it's good. I have to find it inside.
It's part of the spiritual process, right? Part of the
Right.
spiritual journey.
Mhm.
You've evolved and now your life is different.
Right.
And this is a new chapter, another chapter for you. So you're just going to have to find that layer, dig a little
Right. And
deeper,
take
find the
that
layer,
coat off,
take
as
the
you said.
coat off, right? Yeah, it's crazy because it's not an easy journey. So tell me then about your spiritual practices, Anne, and how you're coaching, because you do one-on-one, you do group coaching, workshops, etc. So how does what spiritual practices do you bring into your personal life and your coaching?
I think spiritual practice, particularly with what's going on in the world today, is absolutely essential to being able to center, much less having peace. The chaos that we're going through right now, like the chaos that occurs in the cocoon as the caterpillar dies and the imaginal cells grow, can really affect you. So I guess I'll just go through it in terms of my day. When I wake up, one of the first things I do is I go out in my backyard, and I've built a labyrinth there, and I've got a little memorial to my husband. I don't have ashes because I buried them in California in the land that he really loved. But a good friend of mine, a ceramicist in New York City, did a wonderful marker, and it says his name and when he lived, and it says a shining star in the desert sky, and it's got pictures of mountains and whatever. And then she did four smaller ones for the two dogs and cats that we had. So that's kind of there.
Oh,
And I've got a stone owl behind that because his affinity, his power animal was owl. And so I have the labyrinth and I go outside and I look at the sun and I have a little prayer or saying that I say to the sun and I put my feet on the earth. I take my backyard has a lot of dirt. So I put my feet on the earth and then I walk the labyrinth. And when I'm at the center of the labyrinth, I go around to the four directions. And then I go inside and I have an altar. Next to my altar, I have a little altar about my relationship with him. And but my altar is called the Face of the Earth altar that Lynn taught us to do. And it has our our input, our life in the South, in our what we do, and then in the North, input from the universe. So that I've got candles and arrows, pointing up to the universe. And then on the right, it's life again, but not my input. It's the elements of my life, things that a stone or a picture that represents my life. And on the other side, on the left is death and grief and the dark side. So I'll say prayers there, pull an oracle card. I'm very connected to power animals, so the deck I'm using now is oracle cards related to animals and what they can teach us. And then I have crystals and things. I start my workday with a prayer. And really, honestly, it's just kind of integrated into my life. The big thing is getting present. That is a spiritual practice, staying centered. And I'll light a candle before I coach or before I write. That's pretty much the extent of it. I hope to find a community here in Tucson that may do some ceremony but I haven't found that yet.
well, you could
But
start
that's
one.
yeah, or I could start one. Definitely with this house, I could do that.
Yeah, there you go. Get inspired, start one, right? If you can't find
I
one,
like that, Beth. I
start
should.
one.
And
Yeah,
that may be why I'm not finding it. It may be
correct. Because you need
right,
to do it. You need to start it, right?
right.
Yeah, very good. That's amazing. I love that you've got that in the backyard, that you've got a mini labyrinth and you've got this practice that you do. Mine is I've got a little altar with tarot cards, and like you, I'm also drawn to spirit animals. In fact, I have got a whole spiritual team that I talk to different ones now and again, but three of those are animals, and again, one of them is
Oh,
an owl.
wonderful.
One of them is an owl.
It is.
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah.
When my husband he was in a photography school before he studied film. And they mainly sent, it was in Santa Barbara, California, Brooks Institute of Photography. And they mainly sent people to advertising agencies and things like that. But that really wasn't who he was. He was an explorer and he was very creative. And he was in an art class and they told him to do a self-portrait. And he did a portrait of an owl with his eyes and eyebrows, and they failed him on that. They didn't like that at all. And so
Really?
he
And I
did
think
a
that's fascinating that he saw himself as the owl.
right. And it was really his eyes. I mean, it was really him and his
Wow.
eyebrow.
Wow. Well, that's a very narrow-minded
He
education
left. He
system there,
left
right?
after a year. Yeah, he left after a year. He said he couldn't do it and he went on to University of Iowa and that worked for him well.
So tell me about as your spiritual journey has evolved over the years with your husband and now without, how have your relationships and your daily life and your overall well-being changed? Only because you talked a little bit about joy and those getting present. And so I just wanted to touch on that because that's really important. Those little joyful moments along the spiritual journey. So, how has everything changed for you over the years?
I was very fortunate when I met my husband. We were friends for several years before we got together. I was very much into career. I didn't think he would be the type of person that I would fall in love with and marry. It was very different, but I was extremely fortunate. And I think in another situation, the marriage may not have lasted because of how I changed. But his sister was a healer. He meditated. He wasn't in a particular group or practice, but he was very open to everything that I did. And as I said, with Lynn, it was a huge change once we moved to California. And really, what happened, and you've alluded to it, I took the coats off, but it was a very challenging and struggling time for me. In some ways, in my business, learning that I was giving my power away, and also that I was changing. And a lot of my friends just couldn't understand why I was going off the deep end in this la la land work. And then there were certain times where financially it was very lean for us. And had always been on a path where there was going to be money, and I was going to be on that road well traveled rather than the road less traveled. So a big challenge was accepting those changes and feeling comfortable with them. Another one was developing my intuition, trusting what I was hearing and knowing that the outside world wasn't completely supportive. But the joy started coming with both the peace within and also within my family and with certain friends. They were starting to see the benefits of the change in me, where they saw me go through that struggle. Why is Anne, staying in this business partnership? Why is she examining all these things? She doesn't really need to do it. It doesn't have to be a struggle like that. But it led to that joy, that ability to center and be happy with who I was. I don't think, and I don't know if you have, I don't think that in the beginning, in the first 10 years or so, that I would say to myself, this is worth it. I absolutely know that this is my path and I need to do it, but something kept me going. And Lynn was such an experienced and brilliant teacher. She knew who I was. She didn't try to get me in the beginning to know all my chakras. She got me right on power right away because I was in the corporate world. And now, going through my husband's passing, having to clear out 30 years of stuff, learning how to live in solitude. And then, as I alluded to, going through a wildfire as I tried to sell the house and being on my own, I realized that I not only had joy, but I had strength. And that strength brought me joy. I was able to do this. And even being in Tucson, I have to build a life. I have two very, very good friends here, and I'm so grateful for them. But I have to build a life and make it happen. And what I realize is that the joy comes from knowing that I'm on the path, knowing that I'm guided. I really believe that when you get on the path, a kind of safety net comes under you. It's not going to collapse. You might go through different struggles, but you're held, and there's joy in that. And there's also joy in the fact that you're on a path that can fulfill you and will go on forever. You can always learn, and you're not on that well-traveled path that can have its pitfalls. It may keep us a little safe and not struggling, but you don't learn necessarily about yourself or experience the real magic of life and change and the unknown.
Very true. Trusting, a beautiful word,
Trusting
a
one.
beautiful word, because again, we've been taught not to trust ourselves, not to believe in ourselves, to believe in other people.
Right.
Before we trust ourselves, why don't you trust their answer, not your own?
And to believe that society's path is going to bring you happiness. And it doesn't always bring you happiness, because I think the true happiness and what you're getting at with the joy is going within and finding out who you are and speaking your voice in the world. And it takes time and
Some of
real.
it's just nonsensical when you actually listen to your intuition, when you listen to your those voices that are talking to you. You're not insane. You're not,
Right.
and it might sound totally nonsensical to most people and people around you, but it's not their journey, it's yours. And you've got to understand and hone in and start trusting yourself, right?
Absolutely. Trust is the essence. But then it's wonderful. And you are able to quiet yourself. And I don't always hear guidance because sometimes I feel that my guides and my teachers are just about a foot away. They're there, but I have to go through this on my own. But overall, when people see my life, particularly lately with what I've gone through, and they say, wow, you've really done it. I don't know if I could have done that. And they see the happiness and the joy in the midst of it. You realize, yeah, I did. It was hard, but I did it. I was married, I knew my husband 44 years. We were married 38 years. And the idea that I have in many ways reinvented my life gives me a lot of joy. I mean, I miss him and the grief is really there, but was I to sit in that house and be sad for the next chapter? Or was I to take the grief and bring it with me and say, there's more to do in my life? There's more to give the world. As you said, you move into service. Your volume is muted. I
Oh, I don't know why. Okay, I must have
don't
muted it by
know
mistake.
either.
There's me talking away. And there's no...
That's okay, no problem.
Yes, the service from service to self to service to others. And you can, like you said, you had that grief, but you took it with you. You can't run away from those. Things will follow you everywhere. But put yourself in the best place to deal with it. And
That's right.
right?
There's
And maybe that house where you were living wasn't the best place to deal with it because there was too much trauma. There was too much. So if you move yourself to a different place, you experience it differently, right?
You're absolutely right. There's a wonderful quote that I'm paraphrasing from the author Barbara Kingsolver that I found a couple months ago. And she said, you don't think you can make it through. And in some ways, you don't. You're only half of who you used to be. But at one point, that other half of you wakes up and takes over.
Oh,
Isn't that lovely?
that's really lovely. And that's very true.
Mm-hmm.
That's very true. Um, so let's talk about that. So how does personal joy and living authentically contribute to the collective consciousness of the planet when you move from service to self to service to others? How does that contribute to the collective consciousness, Anne? Tell us.
I think my thought is, and I think it's very much part of my purpose, is that with that peace and joy, if you bring it into an environment or contact with people, that affects other people. They may not realize what's happening, but I see that in the past couple of years. I see that my presence is heartening to people. And I don't mean 24/7 or that people say, oh, it's great that Anne is here, but I can see that result. And I heard something recently. You know how we'll sometimes say you bring your light into the world and that light affects people? Well, they said it's not as much your light, even though that's true, it's your frequency, your vibration. And that really opened it for me. You try every morning. I pray in the four directions to that I'm committed to rise, to raise my vibration. And as I said, it's not 24/7, but your presence and what you've learned helps others. And it may, in some cases, motivate them to take that inner journey, or it may give them a momentary feeling like, yes, I can dream, or yes, I can do that. And I think it's less by example and who you are than what you've been able to clear out. And now I think about what your frequency is. And we really need it now. I think a lot is collapsing, but I think that something else is rising, and we're helping that. Within the cocoon, the caterpillar cells start dying, and then the imaginal cells start growing. But the caterpillar, which you can look at our society right now, the caterpillar cells want to live, so they start attacking the imaginal cells. So the imaginal cells have to get up, and when they reach a tipping point, it happens. So we can think of ourselves as imaginal cells right now.
Yeah, that's a very good way of explaining it. You there's no making an omelette without breaking eggs, right? You've got the oldest
Oh, that's a good one
breakdown.
too.
The old has got to break before the new. You can't build anything new without destroying
Right.
what's the old stuff. So the old stuff's got to go. But it's very clunky and uncomfortable
Sure is.
when you're trying to get rid of the old. And those systems have been in place in power for a long time, too long, long time. And it's going to take a long time to break them down. But it will happen as we rise.
That's right. I
Vibration
totally agree.
rises. Yeah,
And I think maybe, your being in nature now and my having been in nature and my yearning for it in certain ways has allowed that development, has nurtured you as an imaginal self.
yeah. And the constellations here are just amazing. I mean,
Oh, I'm jealous.
there's no street lights, and just I
That's
have just this whole amazing star system everywhere, right? 360 all around me wherever I look, right? On a clear night.
Oh, that is so wonderful. In our
Phenomenal.
bedroom in California, I could just turn on my pillow, look at the window on my head, and in the winter, see Orion chasing the Pleiades. It was just great. And then you could go outside and see the Milky Way. And
Yeah.
it's wonderful.
Yeah,
It's just
it is. Well, that's our connection. We are galactic beings, aren't we?
right. We
Which
are.
we're made of stardust. We come from the stars.
And to the stars we shall return,
And
right?
to the stars we shall return. We are just here on a momentary journey, 80
Right.
years, 60, 70, 80, 90 years, whatever it is. It's very short and fleeting, right, Anne? We're
That's
just
right.
having a human experience as a soul.
That's right. I completely there. There's a lot of wisdom in that.
So before we finish, do you want to talk a little bit about your book?
Oh, I would love to.
Yeah, tell us
The
about your book.
the book is called Chrysalis Personal Transformation from the Inside Out, and it's a free ebook, and it's on a number of platforms. On my website, ambenino.com, you can find where you can get it. And what happened was I was going through a period in my business where the regular marketing that I was doing to larger organizations, which was the bulk of my income at that time, just wasn't working. Things that I had done before that had really worked, and I was getting both worried and I was also very perplexed. And I finally just surrendered and I just said to Spirit, what am I supposed to do? And they said, you have an idea for a book, write it. And I resisted because it was like, I'm not going to write a book. I have to make some money right now. I had written one book at that
Mm.
time and I was happy about the idea of doing it. But I said, all right, I'll take 2 hours a day. And I had the idea of Chrysalis as a guide for personal transformation. And I started putting the 2 hours a day. I call the writing style a journaling stream because what started coming out was each chapter was a stage in Chrysalis, the caterpillar in the ordinary world, going into the cocoon, growth and struggle, the development of the butterfly, and the emergence of the butterfly. And then I did a chapter on the chrysalis that the world was going through. This was back in 2015. So I started writing, and what was coming out was not prose, it was small verses, exercises. Each chapter has a mythical story that relates, say, the silent tree is the mythical story in the cocoon chapter. And they were very short. If I wrote a verse, it was maybe 6 or 7 lines. If I wrote an exercise, it was just a couple sentences. And I just went into a free stream, a journaling stream of chrysalis and how it related to our transformation, the growth and the struggle. And that was wonderful. About 3/4 of the way through chrysalis, another book came through like a locomotive called Kaleidoscope, which I found out in researching that is the scientific name for a group of butterflies. And that was more about living in the new energy. And very briefly, I wrote 5 books between 2015 and 2019 before my husband became ill. And only 2 of them are out now, but I'm getting them all out. One was Hummingbird, a riff on vibration, and they're more prose, the others. Hummingbird, a riff on vibration, is about not only having a relationship with the earth, but having one with the cosmos. Then I wrote Dragonfly, Transcending Our Illusions. And then I wrote Firefly, which was about exuding light. And I was writing that, and I just said, Anne, this is too far out about light in your body. No one's going to read this. They're going to really think you're crazy. I was confident in myself at that point. And I just Googled light in the body, and I found an article in the Guardian about Japanese scientists. They're very fascinated with the firefly there, that had done a study in 2009 that humans are bioluminescent, but we can't see it with the naked eye. And it's not our auras, it's within our body. So I wrote Firefly. And now, with my husband's illness, I kept coaching, but it wasn't a time to get the books out. So Hummingbird will be out pretty soon. And as soon as I can, I'll get the other ones out as well. So Chrysalis was a gateway to these other books that were guided. The muses just said, get them out. And I realize now, initially, they were more about my own learning and getting ready, but hopefully they'll help others.
Well, maybe that's what the Galactics are talking about when the channelers channel the different groups of beings, and they talk about us transcending into or ascending into light bodies.
Right. And in the research, there are people that go on I know one friend who did it, that go on 2-week workshops living on light, prana. And when I did the research, there are people that are really working on that. And a good friend of mine who was a professor, very grounded, she did one, and she had water, but basically they lived on light. And some people look at it as more of our higher self and our souls, or our super conscious self is coming into our body, and that's how we move to a new dimension.
Yeah, that's a whole other podcast right there, Anne.
Right.
We could
Right.
continue that in a whole other episode,
We
right?
could. We could.
So I'm going to finish with some
Okay.
with questions, 2 questions. If you could go back in time, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I think I would say it's all going to be all right. You're going to make it. Keep going and keep vitality in your life.
Nice. And what do you hope your story will inspire in other women who are looking to live a more purposeful and joyful life?
I think that it would be that change makes life vibrant. Don't be afraid of it. Take risks, get comfortable with change. And also, very, very importantly, it was a big part of my work with Lynn Andrews. Get comfortable with the unknown because it's here and it's part of our lives. And don't let the unknown create fear because it will hold you back in a big way. And look at the mystery, look at the adventure of it.
Beautiful, beautiful way to finish. A million thanks to Anne for joining me today. Thanks to our audience for hanging out with us, and we hope you found it inspiring and empowering. And you'll find all you need to know about both of us in the details below. So until next time, this is the Passionate Pioneer and Anne signing off. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Beth.
Wow, another powerful Passionista conversation. I hope that this guest's journey, experience, and story has inspired something deep within you. Remember, it's about following the joy moments in your life. It's a beautiful dance with the universe. If you would like to dive deeper into your joy journey with me, you will find all the links below this video, including a link to a free workbook that will help you to start your joy journey. And until next time, Passionista, I'll say goodbye. Much love and joy.